Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. We bring you thought-provoking guests and topics every week to challenge your thinking about leadership. Our aim is to help you become the leader that you wish you always had as we learn together and lead together. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honoured today to be joined by Joe Hart. Joe is an organizational psychologist, an executive coach, and he's the author of a book called True Perspective, Why Leading with the Truth Always Wins. And it's this concept of true perspective and leading with the truth is going to be the main theme of what we go through today. So Joe, without any further ado, please do say hello to our audience. Give us a little flavour of your rich background and what led you to be with us today.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Mick. Really appreciate being here and having the opportunity to talk to everyone. My background, I guess where it starts is I studied psychology early on, but probably landed in psychology because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I figured psychology is interesting. So why don't I just study that? You know, as I got more interested and more in depth with it, decided that that's really where I wanted to focus in my life and in my career. You know, quickly after I finished my degree, I landed a job at Gallup, and Gallup was a fantastic organization to sort of, I guess, learn the ropes and understand the power of data, but also when you apply that data, the meaning and the change that can create. So yeah, that was a fantastic start to my career. And then, you know, since then, did a couple of other things and then landed on the decision to go out on my own and start my own gig. And so that's what I'm doing. And I have been for the last 5 years or so.
Yeah, well done, Joe, and congratulations on your success. That's really cool. I have to say that I studied engineering. So for the first few decades of my life, I was deeply into trying to understand how things work, etc. And my discovery of psychology came many years later. And I sometimes think about, well, what if I had studied psychology from the outset? But I don't think you can think like that. It's all of my life experiences lead up to where I am today, and my newly found discovery of psychology just takes me in a new thought direction, not just a new career direction, but I reshape the way I see the world. Tell me from your perspective, what was it about psychology that stimulated you even in those early years?
Yeah, I think I was always fascinated in the brain. And so, you know, my interest actually was more about the biological side of things and the physiological side of things, not necessarily the social psychology aspect, which was probably where I spend more of my time these days in my practice. Yeah, just that deep fascination with how the brain worked. And I think maybe you'll appreciate this as an engineer, but wanting to understand what it was about the brain that made it so unique, and the fact that it was a mystery and no one actually understood it yet, that just drew me in. I was like, ooh, I want to understand this more. I want to go deeper. And yes, it's frustrating to not get the answers sometimes, but I'm actually okay with that. I think the mystery of it is part of what makes it exciting and interesting. And so the individual differences side of things really fascinates me. So even before I decided to study psychology, I always had friends that were a bit unique and different. And, you know, maybe that says something about me, and maybe I'm a bit unique and different. But yeah, I was just fascinated by different ways of thinking, different ways of behaving. And I just wanted to understand. It was not judge it, but just understand. I was like, oh, this is interesting. And yeah, that's sort of what's led me.
There is a common thread there in the end. That is the same discovery for me. I was always trying to make rational sense of the world. And it wasn't until I started studying psychology to realize just how emotional decision-making influences our behavior and our actions, that when you're looking at someone and they're doing something that doesn't seem rational to you, it's because it's not. It's not rational. It's emotional. And it's been an amazing journey for me to shift away from trying to make rational sense of the world to then accept that not everything is rational and that people behave in the way they do because of chemistry in their brain, all kinds of things, yeah. All right, so tell me about the Gallup years. What did you learn working in Gallup?
Oh, geez, that's a big question. So I did spend 7 years at Gallup, but I think the first thing I want to say about my experience at Gallup was data's not everything. And I was fresh out of uni. I had this arrogance because I'd really applied myself. Like, I'm not a maths person. I'm not a maths head. So although I'd like to think I am, I'm just not. It didn't come naturally to me. And I really struggled to go deep into that realm. So when it came to doing advanced research methods, which is not maths, it's statistics, I worried. I thought, I'm going to struggle with this. So I went deep into it and, did okay. But then I went into Gallup thinking, okay, this is a real, data hungry organization. They've got some of the best data in the world in the space of employee engagement, customer engagement data. I need to sort of level up. And actually that wasn't my experience. So my experience was the data research had been done. All we were doing was taking the data and applying it to reports and using descriptive statistics, for want of a better way of putting it. And so, this arrogance in me was like, oh no, we need to be doing more with this information. And when I tried to do, regression analysis and tried to do some fancy stuff for my clients, I just watched their eyes glaze over and I was like, okay, that's interesting. So what was the mean score again? Like they weren't interested in that depth. And that sort of frustrated me initially. And I thought, what's wrong with them? And what I realized relatively quickly, maybe not quickly enough, was that wasn't true for them. And what I mean by that, it didn't have meaning for them. And so in terms of the difference between something that's, say, statistically significant versus meaningful in terms of observable can be quite vast. So something can be statistically significant from a research standpoint, but if you're looking in the differences, say, in terms of behavior, if you can't observe it, then how significant is that really? Right? And so in terms of engagement, employee engagement, it's not enough to say, well, if I do a regression analysis and here's this, insight that I've drawn from that stats analysis, they go, okay, that's interesting, but, is that really meaningful? And so there's this really interesting distinction that sits in there. And I think it wasn't until I started interacting with organizations, so not just sitting behind the numbers and looking at the spreadsheets on a screen, that I started to recognize what engagement really was and what it meant. And that was, I think, the most beautiful lesson that Gallup taught me, that qualitative, which is actually experiencing people, rubbing shoulders with them, belly to belly, eye to eye, that's where the truth is. Like, that's actually the truth right there. The data that you measure, that's how you can generalize what you're experiencing or how generalizable that truth is. And I steal that from one of my colleagues at Gallup, actually. And he was the mastermind behind all of the assessments that they build from a selection standpoint. He said that to me once when we were sort of debating, let's say arguing over correlation versus causation and, that sort of age-old discussion from a stat standpoint. And he just said, qualitative data is where you'll find the truth. Quantitative data is how generalizable that truth is. And that quote just smashed me. Like, it absolutely just penetrated me so deeply, and it stuck with me. And I really stand by that now. And I understand. I just had this moment of clarity where I understood what he meant. I was like, whoa, I get it now. So I relaxed a little bit on the data. I was like, yeah, data's good. However, first, I think it's really important to identify that truth and then seek to understand, i.e., the hypothesis. What's the hypothesis? That's where the truth sits, right? The question. And then let's look at the data and see how generalizable that is. And that, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Joe. If I can say that I'm taking 4 key things here. Well, let me play it back to you and see what you think. The first one is my experience with Gallup, that there is depth in the research, that the research might have started qualitatively, but they can turn it into something quantitative that does try to make sense of the world, right? So that would be the first one. The second one would be that we can tend to get into a level 1 listening. That is what Otto Scharmer would call it with his generative listening or deep listening approach, that we start looking at the data to confirm what we already believe, that we don't necessarily look at the data to go, is this telling me something new? We're starting to look for things that confirm what we've observed. And the data that really captures our attention are the ones that back up beliefs that we've had that we've never been able to quantify. And then this data is telling me, yeah, you're right, Mick. That is how the world is. Then this difference between qualitative and quantitative, what's jumping into my mind here is that the qualitative comes with emotion. The quantitative is emotionless. It's just kind of, there's a number. It might make you feel something, but in itself, it doesn't have the emotion of the people that were interviewed. And then the fourth one is then, what do I do with it? Right? It's meaningless if you come to me with a bunch of graphs where I've got no idea what to do next. Learning's not important. Applied learning is important. What we do with it next. How does that sit with you, Joe?
Yeah. I think it all really sits beautifully. I think the one that sort of snagged for me was we tend to seek validation for what we believe. And, I 100% agree with that. But I also felt myself rejecting it. It's going, no, I don't. And, of course, that is what we all do, right? It's what we all do. And, in statistics in particular, and that's why it's important to generate your hypotheses before you eyeball the data. Otherwise, you're going to look for biases in that data without even realizing it. Your brain does it. There's something that there's a type of analysis that we did at uni, and it was called using the family-wise error rate. I'm probably going to get this wrong, but basically that's why you use that method of statistical analysis. It's not as, you're less likely to get significant results, but you're more likely to be able to identify whether it's truly significant because you're not eyeballing the data before you've generated those hypotheses. It's just really interesting, the bias that we have to validate what we already believe. And also, when presented with data that contradicts what we think the outcome is, the number of times that I've seen really compelling data that generates an insight, you think, yeah, wow, why wouldn't you do this, or why wouldn't you follow this information? And people reject it because it doesn't fit with their belief system. Well, that's the opposite of what you've just said, but basically the same phenomena. Yeah. So yeah, that was interesting.
And we see that all the time in political circles, I've got to say, every election that comes around, almost regardless of which country you're in, and there'll be stats released and people will interpret those stats in the way that backs up a emotional decision that they've already made to go in one direction or another. So it does take discipline to step back from the data and go, hang on a second, what is this really telling me? And is it meaningful? Yeah, really powerful. So tell me about the transition to doing your own thing, Joe. What spurred that on? Well,
look, the other thing that Gallup taught me, which I grappled with, and that was, that they've created a set of tools that are really robust and really powerful, but I wanted to explore more. I wanted to have a look at all the other tools out there that had value and were robust and powerful as well. So that was when I shifted to a company called Chandler McLeod, who talk about being vendor neutral, and they are one of the original organizational psychology firms in Australia. So that was sort of interesting for me to sort of jump ship from Gallup, which was very much about the Q12 strengths-based psychology and their set of tools, and quite insular in that view, not in a negative way, but that's just, they're very wedded to their tools, their belief system, let's say. So going to Chandler McLeod, where they said, we take all of the tools on the market, even Gallup's, and we synthesize them to create solutions. I thought, oh, this is interesting. It's exactly what I'm looking for. So I went in there, and my experience at Chandler McLeod was great because it taught me that leadership is a lot harder when you're in it than it is when you're observing it. And that was my first leadership role. And I was definitely out of my depth. I didn't know what to do. And I was struggling. I was overwhelmed. I was challenged, and I didn't like it. I was like, I actually don't enjoy this. So grappled with it, did what many people do when they're under pressure, and bunker down and push through and challenge myself to be better and more. And all of that stuff, which I did. And then got to a point where I was like, I'm not enjoying life anymore. And I didn't enjoy myself at home because I didn't enjoy myself at work, and vice versa. So it just started to become very difficult. And so the right thing to do was to exit Chandler McLeod. And at that point, there was an opportunity to take on some client work, which I thought, okay, this is awesome. Maybe I'll start my own gig. It probably came a little bit quicker than I'd in my mind imagined would be the right time. But then I was also, well, there's never a right time, so took the leap and didn't really look back.
Journey that you're talking about is one that many go through. We call it the roller coaster here. So we talk about this on the show a lot. We talk about the roller coaster of the first-time leader. They have the euphoric highs where they've finally been recognised for their prowess. They're wonderful at what they do. So for you, it's organizational psychology. Someone else, it might be nursing, accounting, engineering, whatever it is. And they get these euphoric highs where they're so happy that they've been recognised, and they'll tell everyone that will listen and some that won't listen about their new promotion, and they're so happy. And then the thud comes, the thud of realisation that no one has ever shown them what it means to be a leader. And they go on this journey of discovery, and they do start questioning. They start going, oh, I don't think I like this. I don't think leadership is for me. Any tips for people out there that might be feeling that today, Joe? Any tips for them?
Yeah. So from my perspective, I knew before I accepted that role that it wasn't what I wanted. If I really sit with, did I want it? The answer was no. Was part of me saying to myself, well, if you say no to this, then you might squander opportunity. Or this is an opportunity for you to provide more for your family because you'll get paid more. And, why would you say no to this? Or how do you know that this isn't what you want and this isn't right? Right. So they're all of the questions that I was asking myself in that moment where I've got a senior leader saying, I want you on my team, and sort of asking you for an answer in that moment. And I remember my answer was, wow, I'm really flattered. Thank you. I've never been a leader before, and I'm going to need some help. That was the first thing I said. The response was, oh, of course. No, I understand that. And yeah, we'll be here to support you. So that gave me a sense of, okay, cool. I've put it out there that I'm not feeling overly confident. I've been met with, yes, I'll support you. Without going into the detail, that wasn't my experience. My experience was, sink or swim. And what I was looking for in a leader, which is really interesting, was actually a friend, somebody that I could actually speak to on an equal level and be challenged by and respect, but also be respected. And I realized a lot about myself in terms of the relationship that I need with a leader. And it's not a tell me what to do, or I want to be like you when I grow up. It's let's respect each other. And I want a relationship. Like I really want a relationship. And I remember having that conversation at one stage where it wasn't quite gelling. And the words that came out of that leader's mouth were, oh, why do you keep wanting a relationship with me? And I was like, whoa, what do I do with this information? And look, in hindsight, it all made sense because it was a bit of a turnaround at that time. It was come in a bit sort of cost-cutting approach. It was objective, and it was a finite period of time in that leader's mind. And for me, it was like, well, yeah, I get all of that, but I still want a relationship. Like, we're doing this together, aren't we? It just taught me a lot about myself in terms of what I want from a leader. But it also taught me about what that does to me in terms of my leadership, because I had a team reporting into me. And when I wasn't getting what I needed emotionally from a relationship at that level, where you can't talk about certain things with your team, right? Decisions and whatnot. So you want that friendship at that level. It didn't translate well into my behavior. I felt like something was missing. And so honestly, it would be really interesting to sort of go back in time and ask, sort of peer in and see myself the way that my team was seeing me and go, oh, what were they experiencing of me? And I know I wasn't in a good place. in myself, like internal self-awareness says, yeah, I wasn't in a good place. And I can only imagine that their experience of me was either withdrawn, shut off, arrogant, not there, not present, didn't do much. I don't know what that experience was, but it certainly wasn't amazing.
Two important things that are popping into my mind from that discussion there, Joe. The first one is leadership is actually all about how you relate to other human beings. So to say to someone, we don't need a relationship, that's quite bizarre. I'll just put a line under that one. The second one was really important for the audience at home. Have a think about what Joe is saying here, and it's great that he can reflect on it now. But he's basically saying when you as a leader are not getting what you need, it's very hard for you to give your team what they need. It impacts the way you show up. Yeah, really powerful lesson there, Joe. I want to jump to something because we don't often have people that have got a Gallup or a Chandler McLeod background on the show. You did speak about instruments. You spoke about different tools and the like that they have. There are so many of them out there. There's Hogan profiles, OPIs, LSIs, even down to personality stuff, MBTIs, DISC, EQI. I think if I kept going, we'd probably take up the entire show of acronyms of different tools out there. How do leaders that are listening to this show make sense of the plethora of tools out there and which ones they might use and why they might use them?
Yeah, there's not an easy way to answer this question because there are so many tools, and I believe that they all serve a purpose and they're great in terms of what they do, but know what you're trying to achieve. You know, it sort of sounds really basic and simple, but know the purpose of the outcome that you're trying to get to. So if you're wanting to develop somebody and you think, well, there could be a great tool out there, choose a tool that's developmentally focused and it's not going to draw in benchmarks or it doesn't have a clinical background, or be really conscious about where that tool comes from. I think a lot of the time we just use a tool because we're familiar with it and we go, oh yeah, someone did that for me, or I went through a selection process and I really liked that, and then I learned about it and I did an accreditation in it, so I'll use that. It's not always the best time to use it, is my answer to that. So, if you're wanting to generate a team outcome or enable a team to be really effective together, don't use a clinical tool. Or don't use a selection tool, because actually you're not trying to evaluate their fit for a role. You're trying to create a sense of connection and enable that team to be more effective. So know what you're trying to do and then seek the tool that's going to help you achieve that.
Potentially not even a tool. It could be a model or a framework at that point. So you might, in the example you use, you might pick OPQ, or you might go, actually, let's ditch that altogether and pull out Drexler-Sibbett team performance model and see, where do we sit on this as a team, right? So, yeah, really, really good. So have a purpose, pick the tool that matches that purpose, and then use it intentionally. Don't just use it because someone else used it someday or a salesman, forgive me, I mean, I get in this role myself, but a salesman turns up and says, oh, you need to use this tool. It's the latest and greatest. That's not the reason to do it. Have a purpose, have a tool that matches the purpose, and then use it intentionally. Really good advice, Joe. All right, I want to dig into some of the things that you talk about now in your current practice. I want to talk about this statement. The masks we wear, is there only one version of us? Tell us what that means.
So I believe that we often show up how we believe people want us to be. So rather than stepping into a situation or speaking what you truly believe, we'll show up as a version of who we think that person wants us to be. And I think that's relevant sometimes, right? So if the context demands of you a certain etiquette, right, that's different, I think. So say if I've been asked to present to a board, I'm not going to roll up in my board shorts and, a pair of thongs. That would be a distraction. They would think, I could, right? And they might go, wow, and that could be part of my whole angle to sort of knock them off kilter and get them to pay attention, right? So that could be part of what you're trying to achieve. But it would seem a bit strange if someone rolled up, in a set of board shorts. So sure, you're most likely going to be comfortable, but you'll be wearing some sort of professional attire to meet the demands of, okay, what's that context asking me to do? It's asking me to present something that's credible, or a finding or a solution or an outcome that they're wanting to achieve. Equally, if I'm catching up with mates in a restaurant, I'm not going to show up in a business suit. They might think, what's going on? Have you got an interview after this? It would be a distraction. Again, it distracts us from why we're there. So yes, there's a reason why we show up in certain ways and certain behaviors, but that's not the whole purpose. I think when we talk about work and when we talk about personal, I think that's a really interesting conversation. And I'm a big proponent of focusing on what's most important. And people say, oh, what do you mean? Like at work or at home? You choose. Because in my view of things, focusing on what's most important transcends the context. Like the context is, yes, it's important, but it's not what's most important. If you really deeply consider that question, what's most important to you right now, it's not about the context. Unless, of course, you're in a life-threatening situation, maybe. But there's something deeper than that, even. It goes beyond that. That's what I mean in terms of the self that we present. It's not a fractured version of who we think we need to be. It's who we truly are. And you can only really get to that answer by focusing on what's most important to you. And that's, of course, my opinion and my perspective.
No, I like it, Joe, and I want to extrapolate and add a little thing and then tell me how well it sits with you or not. So what you're saying is be careful not to fall into the trap. Put the etiquette aside, well put on the etiquette. Be careful not to fall into the trap of showing up the way we think people want us to show up as our authentic self and bring our own superpowers to the table. It may be that someone needs you to be on your A game that day and they need you, but they need you. They don't need a different version of you. They need you and they need your skills to bring to the table. The bit I want to add then, and I think is going to lead us to your book, I think, in a strange way, is that when you do show up as your authentic self all the time and you're not playing a version of yourself, you're then congruent. You're congruent with your values and beliefs. And when you're congruent with your values and beliefs, that's when trust is built. That's when truth comes out. Whereas if you're playing a role, you end up in conflict with your values and beliefs. And that conflict is where trust is broken or eroded, and the non-true you will show up. How does that sit?
Yeah. I think that's a nice extrapolation, and it does definitely talk to my book and some of the concepts in there. I think there's an extra piece that I just want to, on that reflection, I want to add to, and that is potentially we learn that we need to choose something, right? We need to choose what we want to do. And so we choose inevitably around 18 years old, when we finish school, or if you finish school at 16 or whatever it was, right? I want to be a tradie, or I want to, go study at uni. And at some point you make a decision, or I want to be an engineer, or I want to be a psychologist. You make a choice and you try it on, and we make it work because, of course, we face challenges and struggles, and then we have life in all of that. And we have kids, and it gets messy, and we have breakups and divorces, but we are an identity. We are something based on what we do most of the time. And then I often coach clients where it's not working anymore. They've achieved a level of success. They've become, quite senior in their role, or they get offered a leadership position, and then they don't have the relationship, and something's not being met. And it is at an emotional level. So that's why it creates so much dissonance. And what you're talking about, that trust is broken. The trust is in themselves, but often people don't understand where that's coming from. They're like, I don't get it. I don't understand why I feel so bad. And we call it a midlife crisis often, but that's not what it is. What it is a recognition that I can't fake it anymore. I can't keep lying to myself. And when people know that they can't keep lying to themselves, but they continue to lie to themselves, that's where it all falls apart. It is such a toxic place to be in yourself, knowing that you're harming yourself by lying to yourself. It's that awareness that just brings you into a place of hurt. And unless you address it by first saying, okay, I'm not going to lie to myself anymore, as hard as that is, I'm just not going to do it. That will then enable me to unveil what happens next.
That's very powerful, Joe. The things that are popping into my head are this one, that we have a tendency to, and people even say these words, to fake it till we make it. But what I'm hearing from you is it sets us up for fake it till you break it.
100%. And unfortunately, for people that go down that path, it can end terribly. I mean, this is where we step into escapism, and that pretty much includes all forms of addiction, behavioral, substance, you name it. Addiction and escapism fits in there. And the worst form, or let's say the saddest form, suicide. People want to escape life altogether. And usually because they don't want other people to be burdened by their dysfunction. It's done for, that's the reflection, which is really sad. Sad for the people that lose a loved one, but also sad for the individual, that they think that they're a burden on somebody else to the point that they end their life. So, I think, you owe it to yourself and everybody else around you to stop lying to yourself, as hard as that is.
So there's a few things there, and I want to add something important here as well. So the awareness that you've been lying to yourself, you start feeling that. But then the feeling that if you then open up about that to other people, that it's going to be such a shock to them that you become a burden, was the word that you use. But my experience in all of that is when you have those conversations, people are usually very understanding, particularly if they love you. They're ready to hear that. If you've been having internal conflict inside you for a long time, give people some credit that they might be ready to hear that, is the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is you and I are both Australian, so I'll mention Lifeline. So if you're listening to this program in Australia and you are having these problems, there are services that can help you. There's Lifeline in Australia. In other countries, it goes by other names, and you also have your employee access assistance programs in most companies. If you are feeling this and you feel that you need to talk to someone that's other than your family members, your boss, etc., please do make sure that you make those calls. All right, let's get back to this thing about identity. So what we do see a lot is if someone has spent a 30-year career and they've hooked their identity to that career, and then they come to this realization they've been lying to themselves for some time, how does one shift one's identity?
I'm going to take a slightly different tack on this. I'm not sure it's about shifting one's identity. It's actually, I see it more like unearthing one's identity. It's like a fossil that's been buried for 1,000 years. And rather than, I think the tendency is to want to dig for it really, really intensely with a mattock, smash into the earth and get there as quickly as possible. What do I do next? What do I do next? What's the action I need to take? It's like, okay, we know it's here somewhere. All right, X marks the spot. We've just landed it. Now it's about gently and carefully unearthing that. And so like somebody would when they're unveiling a fossil, it's quite fragile. It's been buried there. It's been forming for a long time. And so you don't want to smash into it. You want to gently make sure you go, right, okay, now I've identified where it is. I'm bringing the soil off and, carefully brush the different elements away so I can expose the full fossil. Right. This is how it works in my mind. It's always in you. That's why you've got dissonance, because deep down there's a subconscious part of you that knows it's not right. So how is that possible? Because you already knew, but it was on an unconscious level. At a very early age, you decided, all being told, you needed to be a doctor, or you wanted to be a psychologist, or an engineer was what you're always going to be because Uncle Benny was an engineer and you've got the same brain as Uncle Benny. Therefore, you're going to be an engineer. And you think it's so innocent. And it's like, oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's good. And it was until it wasn't. And you're like, oh, what's hurting here? Something's not right. Now I need to go inward and I need to identify what that is. And I think the best place to start is values and purpose. And do that work. Do that work for yourself, because that's where it all sits. And ask really simple questions like, when I was like, as early as I can remember, what's the first time that I recognized joy in what I was doing? Where I thought, far out, this is so fun and just feels great. And for example, it doesn't have to be jumping on the trampoline or playing. For me, it was when I first learned about fireworks. Something in me as a kid just, I wanted to understand, right? There's a theme there. I wanted to understand. And so this deep fascination in fireworks and how they worked and wanting to create them and seeing how people appreciated them and sharing what I discovered in my own little science laboratory, I could share with other people and they would get joy from it. The whole process, I just loved it. That's an example of where I first experienced joy around something that was sort of weird, if you will. It's like, fireworks. But I was deeply fascinated in it. And I would spend most of my time, like as a 13-year-old, I'd go to the library. During the lunch break, I'd sneak there. My friends didn't know. I'd just go, where's Joe? I don't know. He's not here today. I'd be in the library studying, understanding how to make gunpowder and what were the ingredients I needed to get my dad to help me buy. And I was just I wanted to make rockets and I was just fascinated by it all. No one told me, no one asked me. No one said, why don't you investigate that? It wasn't a research project at science. I was compelled. Something in me wanted to do it. And so that's an example of what you're trying to tap into. It's in there. And for me, it's not fireworks. It's wanting to understand. Something's interesting. And like I said before, individual differences. I've got this person who's really unique. Yes, maybe that is presenting as challenging, but that's because they're not understood. They're not understood. Maybe they don't even understand themselves, but their context doesn't understand them either. So I'm fascinated by that. So rather than, this isn't working, how do I fix it? No, this is awesome. How do I understand it? And that's a very different perspective to take from coaching. And I think most coaches align with that, I would hope.
Yeah, really good, Joe. I want to summarize a little bit for everyone at home. And Joe's bringing absolute nuggets of gold here. If you are feeling that dissonance or that disconnection, that you do need to do the work to go fossicking to find your truth, but don't push it. Let it emerge. Have some self-compassion as you go about that. And the questions you need to be asking yourself are around what really does bring you joy and fulfillment. And joy is different to pleasure. We're not talking about I went to the movies and had a good time. We're talking about something that's longer lasting, that propels you, that almost envelops you. And we're not talking about obsession either. We're talking about what we call flow state, where you just time becomes immaterial and you're just feeling in the flow and feeling like this means something to you. And that's when you can start having your purpose emerge. And when purpose emerges, identity can follow, right? That's what I'm hearing, Joe. For me, I'll give my example. So I had a 30-year career before I do what I do now, 15 years in defence aerospace, which is fun and engineering, making sense of the world. 15 years in urban mobility. And in urban mobility, my whole vision was about de-stressing the way people get to and from work. And funnily enough, it was from research from organisations like Gallup that made me realise that the stressful part was in the four walls. The stressful part was at work. So I pivoted my purpose towards leadership. But in reality, the purpose was to make people's lives less stressful. Does that make sense? So there's a common thread. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, no, I love that. And that's a perfect example of how you've stuck with that same purpose throughout your whole career. There's been that underlying thread. And I would say that's your identity. And if we bring it right back to identity, it really is answering the question, what's most important to you?
Yeah, exactly. And then how my values show up is about how I relate to other human beings, how I treat them, and how I encourage them to treat each other with respect and hold space for each other. And yeah, very good. Okay. All right. So I think this is converging beautifully to the book. So true perspective, because we're talking about finding truth in yourself here. But tell me what this means. Why leading with the truth always wins?
Well, I think we've been talking about it, and maybe it's the antithesis of why lying to yourself eventually loses. So if you take that view that even if you're not sure why, or even if it feels difficult to follow that part of you that just knows, there's an inner knowing, right? I want to de-stress people's lives. Like that's the space. Like it doesn't need to be super clear. It just needs to be in the right direction. It's like, God, I don't know exactly whether this is it, this job or this role or this project is it, but I know it's moving me in the right direction. That's leading with the truth. It's, another way of putting it. And this came about when I first left my paid job, let's say, when you first step out and you're like, wow, how am I going to earn money now? And, I talk about it in my book, but, first gig fell through. So I was sort of destitute and freaking out a bit. And I met with someone and I said, yeah, I want to be like you when I grow up. Basically, that was the conversation. You're an author and, you're successful. And from the outside looking in, yeah, how did you do that? That was my question. And his answer was, follow the energy. I was like, okay, is this some sort of metaphysical class that I haven't been to yet? I said, no, it's have a conversation with people and something will come up and it'll spark your interest, or their interest will be sparked, and just follow that. I was like, oh, well, that sounds pretty simple. And you know what? That was the single best piece of advice, because that is, in a nutshell, leading with the truth. And the truth is, that's interesting to me, or I like that person, or that was really interesting. We had a great conversation. I want more of that. That's leading with the truth. At a very, very practical example, that always wins. If it's maybe I shouldn't do that because, or, if I did that, then that would mean that, and that person might judge me. That's the opposite. That's what we tend to do when we think we know the answer. So embracing that, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm totally okay with that, is where you need to go. So the truth is often unknown, but there's a feeling. Follow that.
I like this, and it is a feeling, and in both ways. You know when it doesn't feel right, and you know when it does feel right. And I like this follow the energy concept. I want to add one more and see what you think of this one. What question can we ask ourselves where we remove the I'm only doing this because other people expect me to do it, to I'm doing this because it feels right and I'm following the energy?
So, yeah, if it feels right and you're following it, then you won't need to ask, is it okay? Or are you cool with this? Because it's sort of like if you deliver a presentation and you have to walk up to the audience and say, was that good? Do you like that? It's like, obviously it didn't resonate for you. Like something was missing. Like if you have to ask for confirmation, then it's not going to work. It's like, when you've delivered a great performance. Like an actor would deliver a theater actor would deliver a performance, and they feel the energy. Like the applause, the standing ovation, that should be enough for them to understand, this is why I do what I do. So I think it's more interesting to ask about the experience that people might be having of you. And that's how I frame it. It's like, how are people experiencing me right now? Right. So if something's not feeling right, rather than say, was that good? Or to ask, okay, what would I do if I didn't care what they're thinking? Because you should care what people think. You actually should, especially in a leadership role. But less about what they're thinking and more about what they're experiencing. So it brings it back to you. It's like, okay, so what are they experiencing right now? And if it's boredom or confusion or being shut down or whatever it is, like that's what you need to understand and go into. When I hear a leader say, I don't give a fuck what people think about me, I just cringe. I'm like, oh, God, wow.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what I really liked about where you took it, Joe, is you were then very congruent with who you are and what you're trying to do. And then the questions that you're asking yourself still had a learning mindset associated with it. So I know what I'm about now. I'm connected. I've connected to my identity. I've connected to my purpose. And my learning mindset is to get better and better at that. So what would I do? What did I do well? What didn't go well? What would I do differently next time? What did I learn about myself? What did I learn about others? Helps me it wasn't, did you enjoy that? It wasn't, did I do it? Self-validation question. Did I do a good job? It's how can I get better and better at my purpose? How does that sit with you?
Yeah. That's it. And, I guess how I frame it is, what's the legacy that I'm trying to create? And I know legacy is a scary word. It's a big word and people often get turned off by it. They're like, oh, legacy, it's talking about an estate or amassing giant amounts of wealth. And that's my family legacy. And it's not that for me. It's about how are you going to be remembered? And that simple activity, and it's in many different books. I don't know who first created it, but the writing your own obituary or writing your own eulogy and being present at your own funeral and thinking about who's there and what are they reflecting on and what was their experience of you. Really powerful exercise. But the simple question is, how do I want to be remembered? So rather than wait until you've got a life-threatening illness to reconcile that, and have that conversation with yourself and consider whether you've aligned to it at the end of your life, be conscious about it now and less about all of our lives, make it smaller so it's tangible. Leadership. What sort of leader do I want to be? And how do I want people to experience me as a leader? What's that legacy? And right now in the role I'm in, what's the legacy I'm trying to create that contributes to the purpose of the organization and the purpose of the team that I'm in? So that whole thread, I think, is a really, really powerful question to consider, but then also to answer. Like not just to ponder and reflect on and be inward about it, but to answer it and align your behavior with that. I think that's where it matters most. Then when you ask people, how are they experiencing me? And is it aligned? And that's it, alignment. And you said it earlier. It's about that congruence, alignment. So first is awareness, and then how aligned are we to that?
I really like that one about how will I be remembered, and to remove the morbidity from that. It could be just 1 year from now, will the person I've had that conversation with, will they remember the conversation and did it have an impact on them? And it could be that you left the organisation. It might be that you changed jobs and went on to a new career. What will you be remembered for? And I do like the deathbed one, of course, but it doesn't. You don't have to wait that long for it either. One other test I sometimes ask myself: would my future self be proud of my actions today? Where this all leads then to is, how does a leader put that into intentional action? So when they've done the work, they've gone, okay, this is what I'm all about. This is what brings me joy. This is my purpose. This is my values. These are my values. How does someone intentionally show up?
Yeah, I think that depends on the person. So I think once you've done all of that work and you're really clear, it would be hard to not be enacting that and to be living it, because otherwise you'd be experiencing incongruence. Yeah, so to be really aware of your values and everything, and then to keep showing up into a role in misalignment, it just wouldn't make sense. Like you actually can't. It's not possible. And I think that's where you see people in crisis. They continue to show up as that, whatever it is. And that person, the expectation, the hard leader or the challenging individual or the successful entrepreneur or whatever it is. And they experience burnout, or we've got many different words, disengagement, tiredness. I'm just over it. Whatever that is, it's because they're becoming more aware of that fossil. They've been digging a little bit, or they've had people probe them and ask them questions about their purpose, and they've thought, I don't know, or I'm not sure, and they've started to do the work. And so when they go there, you can't help but align all of who you are to everything that you do, and that's where it's really powerful. When you do that foundational work, you can't show up in a different way.
I'm hearing a continuum here. Let's see how this sits with you, Joe. So I'm hearing that it might start with unknown incongruence, where you're feeling a bit lost and something doesn't feel right, you're feeling empty, blah, blah, blah. Then as you do the work, you might end up in known congruence or incongruence, and this is where crisis, burnout, I've had enough of this, start questioning your own identity, all of that shows up. And then when you step into congruence, you'll find joy, purpose, and meaning.
And I think what you're doing is sort of irrelevant. Like your purpose, you framed it across all of the different choices that you've made in terms of your career, but you were still aligned, you were still congruent. Maybe less so in certain roles, and there would have been backstory to all of that. But yeah, the trick is to identify, whether you're aligning to that inner stuff, the values, the purpose, the meaning, because that's what it's all about. Yeah, and it all stems from choice, right? If you feel like you don't have a choice and you've been forced to do something, my parents told me I needed to be a doctor or whatever it might be. Yeah, that's not a happy place. That's a really, we all know that intuitively, and yet it's a very common story. Why did you do this? Oh, because my family's always done this. Okay, and so that expectation, it's really hard to challenge it, especially when you're young and you don't know. You just don't know.
The final thing I want to explore now, Joe, I think it's relatively obvious, but I want to bring it to the surface so that we tie a bow on this. What then happens to the team? So when a leader, because this is the leadership project, when a leader is able to find this and they're able to lead with their truth, the impact to the team is what?
So at a really basic level, good. It's really good when a leader's congruent and they're aligned and all of that stuff. I guess that the most powerful thing that happens is they're present. They actually, it's not about them anymore. So when they've got that clarity in themselves, they have the energy to focus on their team, and the team become understood individually, but also as a collective, because the leader has capacity. And that capacity is so powerful because that's like the influence that a leader has over the team. And Gallup's research suggests that 70% of the variance in an individual's engagement is determined by the experience they have through their leader. So the leader is the single most important factor. And so if that leader's in, absolute dissonance, or they're misaligned, or they've got no capacity, so they don't mean to hurt people. They don't mean to be a bad leader. I know I didn't mean to be a crap leader for my team, but I was, because I was so confused in myself. How could I possibly have capacity for anyone else? And that's why you do the work for yourself first. It seems selfish, but I think that's what it needs to be. And the other one and again, it comes from Gallup research, which I love, is to reframe, like rather than focus on how to be a great leader, focus on what followers want. Make it about them. So what do they want from you? And the answer to that question, just for those that are playing along, from that research that Gallup did, and it was a qualitative study, by the way, 10,000 managers, they asked, think of a leader that, inspired you and had a positive impact on your daily life. 3 words to describe them. And they analyzed all that data, and the themes that emerged were trust, hope, stability, and compassion. And I love that idea that first, what do followers want from leaders? And then second, how do I frame all of my communication into those themes? And I just think it's such a powerful, powerful way to consider your role as a leader, guiding people, supporting them, and enabling them to do the work for themselves. Not doing it for them, but enabling them because you've done the work. And you know how powerful that is. So you're holding space, you're creating awareness, and you're offering them capacity that you have through doing the work.
Brilliant, Joe. I just love every part of this. So when the leader's done the work to understand who they truly are and they've connected to who they truly are, that they're no longer spending energy on trying to validate themselves, connect to themselves. They're just comfortable in their skin. They know what they're all about. They've then got the capacity to be present for their team, to make it all about them, to hold space and give them trust, hope, compassion, and what was the 4th one? Stability. Yeah. And stability, I mean, when you're being true to yourself, that means that you're going to be consistent every day. You're not going to have people going around, hey, is the boss in a good mood today?
Treading on eggshells, like that's it's just horrible. It's like, oh yeah, go talk to the boss today. They're in a good mood. That is a red flag. It's like, okay, something's wrong here. Yeah,
brilliant. All right, that's been so wonderful, Joe. I've loved this conversation. I could talk to you all day. This has been just an amazing exploration with you. I'd like to bring us to a close now with our 4 normal questions. So what's the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
Yeah, I love this question. What happens when you're young and some of the choices that you make that potentially you regret, or you think, oh, geez, that probably wasn't great, or, you find yourself saying, I wish it could have been different. Don't make it mean anything. But don't attach who you think you are and your worth to all of that stuff. It's just experience. And I mean, I remember someone said to me once, wasn't an author or anything, it was just a friend. He said, look, and I was having a difficult time. He said, you can't really fail in life. You can only make mistakes. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And so it enabled me to play a bit more lightly with it, because I think I spent a lot of my younger years so caught up on feeling shame and regret about decisions I'd made, which I think now, like, why was I so caught up on that? So at 20, to just be okay with it and not feel like, oh no, I can't, share that or, talk about that because I just felt shame. Just, let go of it. Don't make it mean anything about you now. I think that would have been very useful to fully appreciate that at 20 years old. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful, Joe. What's your favourite book?
I've always find it really hard to go past Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. Yeah, that book, it's so profound in terms of the lessons and the quotes and just a beautiful book. Yeah, man's search for meaning.
That probably leads us to favourite quote then.
The favourite quote that I've got comes from Aldous Huxley and Doors of Perception. And so he says, to see ourselves as others see us is a most salutary gift. Hardly less important is the capacity to see others as they see themselves.
Yeah, nice. I like that a lot.
I just love it.
Yeah, it got me really thinking deeply there. Yeah, I love that. Okay, very good. And finally, I'm sure people are very intrigued by our amazing conversation today, Joe. You've been incredible. So many nuggets of gold today. How do people get in contact with you if they'd like to know more about you, your books, your work?
Yeah. Well, the easiest way is to connect with me through my website, so joehart.com.au. And failing that, if that's not available to them, LinkedIn is another easy way to get in touch with me. So just find me, Joe Hart, and they're probably the two best ways. I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook as well, but yeah, I think my website and LinkedIn are probably the two most frequented platforms for me to stay in touch.
Wonderful, Joe. We'll put the links in the show notes as well, make it easy for people to find those. Thank you so much for being so open with us today, for expanding our mind. It's been just amazing, and thank you for sharing so much of yourself along that journey.
I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation. I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Leadership Project at mixbeers.com. A huge call out to Faris Sadek for his video editing of all of our video content, and to all of the team at TLP. Joanne Goes On, Gerald Calabo, and my amazing wife, Say Spears. I could not do this show without you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project YouTube channel, where we bring you interesting videos each and every week. And you can follow us on social, particularly on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Now, in the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and join us on this journey as we learn together and lead together.